We're in a pretty good spot, I think, if you're through project 4 in terms of the individual, their mindset, their finances, they're really growing here. Take us through project 5. What's happening?
You're right. You're right. Like, I hope that people can feel with every step, the intensity is lower and lower and lower. I mean, recap really where you're at. I mean, we go through all of the problems of the holes in the boats. They're just not happening, right? You don't have bad debt, and you have all the liabilities covered, and life insurance and guardianship, and you're saving. Now you're even saving the right amount. You're dropping it into different tax structures for retirement. You're getting free money from other people, and you're saving enough. And even on top of that, if you passed away, there's a clear set of documents somewhere that somebody could just pick up and be like, well, this is really, really sad, but my goodness, they did a really good job of putting this together, and we can move forward. So now we're to the point where you start to open up a lot of optionality in your financial planning. And I think this is where people get a little bit confused because they think there's a lot of right and wrong. There is in project 1 and 2, right? There was right and wrong. They're staying in the middle of the road and waiting for the truck is wrong. So, but in this situation, we're starting to get to the point where both are decent options. So I get the question all the time, should I pay off my home? And the project 5 is reduce unwanted debt. It's not reduce debt. It's reduce unwanted debt. And it's not reduce low interest debt because we already took care of high interest back in project, what was that, 1? So reduce unwanted debt. This is where you start to look at the idea of if my debt is only a 3% home mortgage, maybe that's not that big of a deal for me to carry that for a long time. In fact, the alternative, if I have to take a bunch of investments that are earning 5, 6, 7 to 12% and not make that interest in order to pay off the debt, numerically it might be worse, but emotionally it might be better. Yeah. And so now we're talking about like life quality and what matters to you and what's unwanted and what's not. So I do have an adjustment in this. So the tasks are basically go through and order out your reasonable debt, because we don't have any high interest debt at this moment, hopefully. Then I would look at the interest rates on your debt and the interest on, like if you are going to pay it off, what's the alternative? If I have $10,000 of debt over here and I have to either pull money from my investments to pay it off or from my income, I pay it off. Well, the reality is I could have sent that money over here to invest as well. So it's still invest versus pay off debt, right? So if we have $10,000 on each side, and I can save 3% over here, what am I potentially earning over here on this investment side? So you compare those two, and I like to do an adjustment here. And I like to look at it at 1.5 or 2, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, somewhere in there at the minimum. What I mean by that is if you have, let's call it a 1% debt over here. I'm doing that because I want to do easy math in my head.
Yeah.
So if you have a 1%, for every 1% of debt, you should be able to make 1.5 to 2% of interest because one is guaranteed and one is not. So you're guaranteed to have to pay interest on your debt. You're not guaranteed to make interest on your investments. Now, some are more sure than others, like CDs and maybe bonds and things like that, right? But usually the more sure it is, the more in line it is with what you're paying.
Right.
Those market rates are almost always very close. So the idea is if I have a 5% interest over here, I better be able to make 7.5 to 10 over here in order for me to feel comfortable with the trade-off of the risk-adjusted return against the guaranteed debt rate. And that's a quick comparison, a rule of thumb that I think people can use to decide between one or the other. The higher your risk tolerance, the lower the factor, right? Yeah. So if you have a high risk tolerance, you're like, as long as I can make more than 6, I'd go over here. I don't even care about having debt of 5% of interest, right?
Yeah.
And other people have a really low risk tolerance. They better be able to make 12 to 15 for a 5% debt. And that tells you a little bit about your risk tolerance as well.
Awesome.
So that is task 2. Task 3 just talks about reviewing the idea of debt avalanche versus snowball. This is either pay the highest interest or pay the highest balance. There's a psychology here. We all know the math is going to work out better if you pay the highest interest down, but sometimes the actual effect is better if you pay the highest balance down because you get that psychological win And then you're able to dedicate more of your money to it because you're excited about it. And just some weird behavioral finance things that happen.
Is that dedicating it to the highest balance amount or the lowest balance amount to knock it out first?
Oh, yeah, that's true. I'm sorry. I said that backwards. That was nice of you to say it that way, though. Yes, sorry. Let's go backwards. So you're either paying, I love the way you were so kind. You're either paying the highest interest.
I'm just amazed that you have so much information in your head. So the very few times where I'm able to catch something, like
I loved it.
Deep down inside, I'm like, am I understanding this right? Hold on.
How many listeners just now were like, this guy's an idiot? Okay, so the highest percentage rate, maybe you have a 7% interest on a debt over here, and it's 3%, but the 3% is only $5,000 of debt. And this one is a lot bigger balance. You knock out, like you said, like Erik said, the smaller balance first. And that gives you success. Like, I only have one more piece of debt left. And that gives you a lot of excitement, hopefully. Yeah. That's funny. Okay, moving on. So that's debt avalanche and debt snowball. And then the last one is to consider debt, at least understand. You don't have to do it, but you need to understand that some people use debt as a wealth building tool. In fact, most real estate is purchased with debt, and the ability to build wealth through real estate is fantastic because of the fact that you can use debt to get there. Very few people are willing to borrow 80% worth of a stock portfolio and then only own 20% of it and then have it grow. The same way we are willing to buy 80% of a piece of real estate, buy an entire piece of real estate borrowing 80% worth in order to make it grow. So there's that leverage allows you to get returns on a much higher balance than if you bought it with cash entirely. So that is where some businesses really think about leverage as a growth engine, but the way that consumers use it is usually real estate.
Debt has always been a thing that I've been afraid of, right? And it actually impacted my career choices based off of where I was going because I was so scared of debt. The older I've gotten, the more, I guess, aware of it I feel like I've gotten to where it's not as scary. There's definitely things that I avoid, but there are also opportunities like what you're saying to leverage it in a way that is less risky, and there's a potential to help.
It's hard because if you have to give one piece of advice that has to work for everyone out there, the answer is you shouldn't have debt.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the safe thing for us to say. So it's not necessarily that debt is bad. It is, depending on the interest rate, that makes it one way or the other, and depending on your behaviors. So are you taking on so much debt, even if you're doing it at low interest rates for investment purposes? Are you taking on so much 3 and 4 and 5% debt that every piece of income that you earn, your entire financial offense is now spoken for to service the debt? That's also just as bad as having a 20% credit card debt. Even, in fact, I might take the 20% credit card debt person. If they make a couple $100,000 a year and it's only $10,000 of credit card debt, they can knock that out anytime, right? Yeah. And so we just fix that problem and we're moving forward. But the point is, it's all about behaviors and what you're doing with it, and also the rates. But the easy thing is to say, don't have any debt.
Yeah.